Welcome to SCM and what was formerly called Simsbury Community Television. And we are here in the new studios. It's beautiful, came out great. So congratulations to everybody that worked on the new studio. And I'm Stephen Mitchell. And as many of you know, I've been working on greenways issues and bike ped issues for many, many years. I was on the board of East Coast Greenway for a while. And advocating and fighting to get the greenways all connected here in Connecticut. And for our very first show on what I'm now calling Bike Walk Connecticut, there we are. It's my honor and pleasure to have Matt Hart and Caitlin Palmer here from CROG. Matt Hart is the executive director of CROG, and Caitlin, your title is?
The Director of Regional Planning and Development.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Okay, there we go. So it's really important, and it's surprising to me how many times I'm in town halls, city halls around the region. And, I was talking about this interview this morning and the executive director and Caitlin Palmer from CROG, and people look at me, CROG, what's that? So what is CROG exactly? And it's something, a quasi county government, or what exactly would you call it?
I'm happy to weigh in on that.
Okay.
But first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here on Bike Walk Connecticut, the very first episode.
There we go.
We're honored, aren't we, Caitlin? So CROG, we're one of 9 regional councils of governments here in Connecticut, and we're created pursuant to state statute. We happen to be the largest at present. We serve 38 municipalities in the greater Hartford region, including the awesome town of Simsbury. And we have roughly 30 employees, and we serve a residential population of almost 1 million people and a geographic region of over 1,000 square miles. So good size by Connecticut standards.
Yep.
So when it comes to what we do, when I explain our role, our mission, what have you, I talk about kind of 3 main hats that we wear. The first would be in the area of regional planning and development, and Caitlin leads that department. And that department is responsible for supporting our town planners, our land use community, our environmental planners, our economic development professionals. So that's one really important hat we wear. A second one that I like to mention is our work in the area of transportation planning. And we happen to be the region's designated MPO. What's an MPO? That stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Yeah.
That's a federal designation from the Federal Highway Administration. There are roughly 400 MPOs across the country. We have 7 here in Connecticut. And in that role, we perform transportation planning. We administer federal and state transportation dollars. There are a couple of very important and key grant programs that we provide to our member municipalities through the work of that department.
Okay.
And then the last hat I will touch on is the one in our name, and that is our role as a council government. What is a council government all about? We provide our member towns with a variety of services, like we do shared purchasing. We work in that area. We also provide a forum for our towns to come together and talk about some of the region's key challenges and opportunities. For example, we've got a project that's looking at the future of waste management here in our region. Very, very important topic. We're looking at stormwater management and how we can tackle that challenge as a region. So again, with that role, we provide a forum for our member towns to come together and talk about regional solutions to some of these key issues and challenges. So it's a dynamic organization. We're on the small side, roughly 30 to 35 staff, and we do a lot of great work on behalf of our members.
So your top 3 things that you handle would be transportation, probably the first?
Transportation is where most of the money is.
Yep.
Yes.
What about education, or is that not really in your bailiwick?
No. I mean, we support our member towns with cooperative purchasing.
Okay.
But what we have here in Connecticut, we have our regional education support. It's the rest, the education. I'm forgetting what the S stands for.
Right.
Centers, service centers, regional education service centers.
Okay.
And in our region, CREC is roughly our equivalent on the education side.
Right. So since I've been a trail advocate, a bike ped advocate in the past 20 or 30 years, it's all these acronyms. You got to know. I call it alphabet soup. So, but anyway, in specific to the reason why I wanted you guys here today was a few months ago over at Bradley Field, I happened to go through a TSA pre-check, and I recognized this gentleman that was kind of coming in behind me. It was a slow Monday afternoon, and sure enough, I go through TSA with Senator Blumenthal, and it was an interesting encounter at the airport. We ended up having a wonderful 15-minute discussion about bike ped issues, about greenways. And I specifically made the comment to Senator Blumenthal, could you imagine if we had a greenway that went from New Haven to Simsbury and then on to Hartford? He looks at me and he goes, that'd be wonderful. I said, Senator, we're 90% there. And in what you've been working on, Caitlin, in the past few months this year, is specifically, I believe a study from Simsbury, includes Bloomfield, Hartford, and East Hartford. And how's that study going? And what are you finding out in terms of how is this really going to all come together?
Sure. So the study is going really well.
Yep.
We're still fairly early on. I think we're probably roughly 40% of the way there. So I can talk a little bit more about like what we've done to date and sort of what are our next steps. But as you mentioned, so the East Coast Greenway, a huge chunk of it really runs through the capital region. And the gap that exists, as you said, between New Haven, really the Rhode Island border,
Yep.
The biggest gap that still is sort of unknown, not really ready to head into design or construction, is in the capital region. So, and it's about a 12-mile gap if you were to kind of go from your most western terminus to your easternmost gap. So we are doing a piece of it in Simsbury. There's a bit of an unknown area that they asked us to take a deeper look into for them. So we incorporated them actually a little bit later into the process. They're a little further ahead than other communities. So we wanted to be able to allow them to sort of move at their own pace. And they'll probably be done a little sooner than the rest of the communities.
Simsbury will.
Yes,
Yeah, specifically. Yes. Yeah, you were.
At least it's done with the sort of the recommended preferred routing option that we came
Right.
up with.
Can you tell me what's winning out in terms of what you're...
So we're in the process right now for sort of everybody is sort of in line at this step where we're beginning our screening process.
Yeah.
So we've identified a variety of criteria: environmental, connectivity, safety, a variety of other ones as well. And we're kind of running each route and various permutations even of the routes through this quantitative process to kind of be able to kind of arrive at that preferred alternative or potential preferred alternative or even the short list of options without sort of, it being too, not too many qualitative characters or things that are a little, what is the word I'm looking for?
Okay. That's okay.
It'll come to me
Yeah.
later.
Okay.
But the qualitative process to identify, what we're looking at. And, some of that is driven by the criteria. Right now, one of the routes that seems to be rising to the top, it's by no means finalized. And it is one that I think we got the most interest in at our community meeting, is an option that might potentially take advantage of an existing old rail bed.
Yes.
That sort of...
that absolutely makes the most sense to
It
me.
rises
Yes.
it up out of the floodplain. It's some existing infrastructure.
Right.
It's not without its difficulties. Every single route that anytime you're planning, there's always pros and cons. But that has scored well. And so we'll see how that process goes. But that's exciting. I don't think that was really on the table. I don't think the town of Simsbury or the residents were aware of that option before we started the study. So that's exciting.
I've lived in Simsbury my whole life, except now I live in Avon. But most of my adult life, for 56 years, was in Simsbury, and I was not aware of that train line still existing. And as we said at the meeting that was in Simsbury, and I think it was Tom Roy, our public works director, that kind of found that and kind of brought that idea up. And the nice thing that I like about it, it does incorporate, it gets you from Simsbury to Terriffill, and it's not invasive to Governor's Bridge. The condo association that was against this, it's hard. Every project has its difficulties. I think this one, getting across the river, that's actually, that's a bridge. I mean, and it's a bike ped bridge. It doesn't have to support a train. It's just a bike ped bridge, similar to what they did over 384 in Bolton, I think technically, just beyond Manchester there. So, call the bridge company, order a 125-foot bridge and, put it in. Actually, on the east side of the river, the Terriffill side of the river, the bridge abutment for the original bridge is still there.
I was gonna say there's I think some potential abutments that we can maybe take advantage of again if this rises and becomes the decided preferred alternative.
Yeah.
And I mean there's still going to be some tricky points. I mean the Governor's Bridge Condo Association, it's they've got property that is close to the river, and they've got property that is still close to some of the railroad abutment and bed areas.
Yeah.
So it's by no means a done deal. Government and organizations, we always complain no one's coming to our public meeting. So I thought it was great. We had a really amazing turnout. We had about 70 people at the community meeting in Simsbury, and there's a large Governor's Bridge contingent. But they brought up, a lot of valid points, environmental concerns. Some of the trails that were shown as, just options, just because the town of Simsbury had some land there.
Yep.
They had concerns. It was really close to some of the properties in particular. So it was really good hearing all those concerns. And I believe the town is sort of working with them as well to just kind of keep them involved in the process and kind of keep that dialogue going.
Okay.
And, we'll have to work around some, parcels, and we've got environmental concerns to take advantage of. There's also the wild and scenic river designation. So it would be,
You're never going to please everyone all the time. But to take up a point that you made, I now live in Avon, and last December we had this, vote in Avon about Old Farms Road, and which goes by Avon Old Farms School. And, all of a sudden there's people on social media saying not such nice things about the town of Avon, like this is some kind of surprise. And Hiram Peck, the town planner, goes, "We've been talking about this for 20 years now." It's like this shouldn't be. If you're interested about any kind of thing that your town is doing, get involved with town meetings. And, you don't say to somebody, "Well, I didn't know about this." Well, get involved. So
we had a lot of involvement at the meeting, and we also have a survey where people can, you can draw your own route if you wanted to, have you considered this option?
Yep.
And so we've definitely gotten feedback through various meetings. We've held one on each of the communities that we're working with. And then there's going to be many more engagement opportunities in the future. And then, through the online survey as well. And I will say by and large, even specific to the Simsbury community, despite folks raising concerns, there was also a lot of support for the trail, just also raising those concerns.
Right. As we were talking before we got on the show here about SI-5, which is the section of trail from the commuter parking lot behind the Mitchell Auto Group and up to the center of town through Ensign Bickford. And it was very rails, trails, greenways were still new. There's still the boogeyman on the trail, and it's like, once people realize how wonderful these things are at connecting communities, and even in cities, and I've gone down to Yale, down in New Haven, where the Greenway starts in New Haven, it's wonderful. It's like, I don't know how many countries are represented at Yale. I think it's over 100 countries. And there's people that are walking and biking on the East Coast Greenway right through the campus. of Yale. So it really is wonderful. So if we were to use, do you know when the next public meeting is going to be for Simsbury?
And I don't know off the top of my head for Simsbury.
Okay.
No, we're still in that screening process right now, and I'm going to be holding our advisory committee.
Okay.
Just the town reps.
So when we go to edit this show, we'll punt that date on it. We'll figure it out. But so and keep watching, because this will be huge. You had a great gathering. I think at the first meeting there was 80, 90 people in the room.
I would say
really well attended.
Yeah, it was really well attended. So it was great.
Very well attended. So what town? So this involves Simsbury, Bloomfield, Hartford, and East Hartford. That's the scale and the scope of the project. Okay. Yeah. And so what was your best meeting of those 4 towns? What was the least attended?
Simsbury by far had the most involvement, which was again awesome to see. We actually had really good attendance in Bloomfield.
Okay.
We did. Yep. We were at the the Alvin Beatrice Community Center, which is an amazing facility. Yeah. I loved it there. Yep. So we had really good attendance, and what we tried to do for the workshops in Bloomfield, Hartford, and East Hartford in particular, because they're just they were at a different point in their planning process, which is to say, kind of we're starting from scratch, which not totally from scratch, because we have all these other plans and efforts that we've been doing, but kind of looking at it fresh with a fresh pair of eyes. We would do sort of like an evening or a earlier option for folks to listen to the presentation and provide feedback, and then we would do an evening one as well. So we had, I think Bloomfield had really amazing turnout as well. Yep. Hartford as well. Yep. East Hartford was a little bit more quiet.
Okay.
But I'm excited for the options that we're coming up with. East Hartford is maybe the most furthest along in their screening process. We've done a draft there. And just about every community, had multiple potential route options. So in East Hartford, for example, there was sort of a more northerly option that utilized the Hockanum River area.
Yep.
Challenges, right? Going through there, there's pros and cons to all of them, like I said. And then utilizing Silver Lane sort of as in that general vicinity.
Yep.
Sort of as a more direct approach, which is interesting because the cross study that we had done several years back for the Silver Lane corridor identified Silver Lane as a potential option. And then there was also a more southerly approach, sort of utilizing space between Pratt and Whitney or the National Development Area, kind of that one. And that's sort of been on the books as a potential option for a long time. So again, utilizing old plans and old feedback and getting new community input.
So being on the board of East Coast Greenway, as I was for 8 years, it's a project that goes from Canada. It's a bike trail, essentially multi-purpose trail that's going to go from Canada to Key West, Florida, 3,000 miles. The Appalachian Trail of, the new generation coming up. So I've been told that it took 75 years for the Appalachian Trail to be built, and there's no pavement. So there's different standards. And here in Connecticut, I think there's 200 miles of it potentially, of that East Coast Greenway. And there's different standards. The standards in Eastern Connecticut, the Airline Trail is mainly cinder. Correct. It's not pavement. So, but really, when it comes down to this local level, when it comes down to, active transportation and how do we get from the Farmington Valley or this region of the capital region, how do we get into Hartford? We got to figure out what we're going to do in Simsbury. Then we've already got 2 miles that's going to open up from Simsbury to Bloomfield. There's already 2 miles that are built to the Griffin line. I remember a comment you made, Matt, at the Bloomfield presentation. It was something along the lines of, we've been studying this for 40 years. And there's, as I said to you before we came on the air, I rode my bike on it, a mountain bike. And from Capaco, you literally could go from Day Hill Road to the center, to downtown Hartford, to where the Hartford Lumber is on the Griffin line. It doesn't make sense anymore as a rail line. There's just too much that needs to be repaired. What's the prospect of using the Griffin line? What's the pros and cons of using it?
Well, let me start off,
Yeah.
and then Caitlin can add on. So it's somewhat of a sensitive issue, right? It's somewhat of a sensitive issue given, the fact that the Griffin line is still an active freight line, right? And we can
But it
argue
hasn't
about
been used in over a
Right.
year.
right.
It hasn't been used in over a
that,
year.
and that's part of the argument. That's part of the argument. So, I think as an agency, we certainly see the appeal, and the city of Hartford is championing it, and that's an important one of our members, and their interests, their desires are very important to us. We see the appeal and how we can make that connection through the heart of the northern part of our capital city.
Some people are calling it the Hart line.
Yeah. Exactly.
Where does the Griffin line end and the Hart line begin, or is it just another name?
It's another, in my view, it's another name for that
Okay.
section.
Thank you. Okay.
So, I think if we can make it happen, that would be tremendous.
Okay.
But we're also cognizant of the challenges in the fact that we would need to work with federal agencies, such as the Federal Rail Administration and others. So it could be a lengthy process. So we feel as though we've got to study that route as well as some other options. And then perhaps at the end of the day, you have multiple routes, right? I mean, perhaps at the end of the day, we do have that trail. We do have that Hart line. We want the Hart line.
Right.
But maybe we need a northern connection as well. So Caitlin, you want to elaborate a little bit?
Sure. I would add to that. I think the exciting part of this process is we're identifying a variety of potential routes. They get narrowed down to a short list, and then those get narrowed down to the preferred. And this is, again, the preferred for the East Coast Greenway. But I think the other routes that we're identifying, by all means, should be constructed. And some of them are well on their way. In Hartford, you've got the Keeney Park connectivity project that wants to connect to the Riverfront, park over there. So that's well on its way, and I think should and will get constructed. Does it become the East Coast Greenway? That's sort of the question. And I think what Matt was saying too, I think geographically that corridor is amazing. I think you would really want to prioritize making sure that you had really strong connections to the communities and the populations along it, so that everybody has, easy access to it. But there are challenges. And if it does get identified to be the preferred route for the East Coast Greenway, and that aligns with, I think it's Hartford 400 that has named it, Heartline.
Right.
Then those two visions align, and that's great. But we've anticipated that being a potential, and there might be other potential routes that are have similar challenges that could make it a lengthy process to become fully constructed and become the East Coast Greenway. So what we have done is, within the scope, we have also said, identify a shorter term route if necessary.
Yep.
Say Griffin Line becomes that preferred route.
Yep.
Well, we need an interim one, most likely, because that's just going to take a long time.
Right.
So I think what we're going to get out of the study is, again, really good interim routes, if that's the case, or a different East Coast Greenway route. And then hopefully the Heartline Griffin corridor still happens at some point. But it is tricky. And I think, constructability, as far as can you put a trail there? Yeah, right. It's easy in that instance. It's not really a constructability question. It's just, what do you do with that right of way? And so for now, we've taken the approach that we want to, in lieu of doing sort of that fine line between rails to trails and rail with trail,
Right.
We're taking a look at that harder question, the rail with trail. We're looking a little bit more into the feasibility of what that would look like. Because again, from a construction standpoint, rail to trail is pretty straightforward. You would be removing rail, you'd be putting down trail. You don't have any clearance issues, no bridge issues.
Pave it.
Yeah, super simple. So we're looking into that. I think that harder question. I think that's going to give us a really good idea of, if we were to do a rail with trail option, what would that look like?
Okay.
How feasible is it? Does it become a short list option for East Coast Greenway? Does it move to preferred? We'll find out.
So, in just from a practicality standpoint, what would be, back to your point at the Bloomfield meeting, what would be I mean, at one point, Home Depot was the last customer, if you will, on the Griffin line. And now they've moved all their operations, from what I've been told, to South Windsor, the other side of the river. So there's no customer for it. And so even studying like rail with trail, why would we, as a society, why would we fix up a rail that has no purpose? Just asking.
Unless the potential exists there for the future, right?
Yeah.
And I think the point we're also trying to make is we're cognizant of the length of the regulatory process.
Okay.
You know, if we were to seek the dedication of that easement.
So Senator Blumenthal said to me at Bradley Field, "How can I help?" I said, "Senator, I have a feeling you know a guy by the name of Chris Murphy and the other senator, and I have a feeling you both know Pete Buttigieg. I have a feeling that if you went to lunch with Pete Buttigieg and you brought your staff along, by the end of lunch, we could have a railroad, a greenway from Day Hill Road into Hartford." And, you know, there's some processes, and I'm oversimplifying this. I understand.
Maybe just a little.
Just a little bit. So, you know, and I understand government time. I don't want this thing to take 10 or 15 years.
Right.
Could we do it in a year to 3, at least to get it in design, not built, but in design, and get it funded? Because, and what Senator Blumenthal did say to me at that meeting in Bradley, there's a lot of money, and he's a pretty smart guy. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that he pointed out to me is one of the biggest problems with all this transportation money is there's not enough engineers to design the project. So there's a lot of backlog.
To apply for the grants, capacity to design for the grants, and then
right. No, and
to build it and do it.
And I have been saying here in Simsbury for years now, you know, we're a bike friendly community. We're a bike friendly community. Oh yeah. So how are we going to get from Simsbury to Terriffill? And everybody, you know, that's like the elephant in the room here, right here in the town of Simsbury. Sorry, but it's been kind of like that off the table. So thank you for doing the study, because you're going to show how this is going to get done.
The plan.
But But go ahead.
Add
A
couple things. So Caitlin knows this. I was recently out in Detroit, and I was just so impressed by their trail work.
Okay.
And they for years, you know, they've had this very popular trail, multi-use trail.
Yep.
Along the Detroit River. And now they're connecting neighborhoods, including historically distressed and disenfranchised neighborhoods, to the river.
Right.
By utilizing abandoned rail lines.
Yep.
So seeing that, I could just see the potential power of that Griffin line, that Hart line option.
Right.
And also when we talk in the field about how do we connect greenways to urban places, right? And how critical and important that is. So that, you know, as much as we love our greenways along the periphery, along the Farmington River and other sections, it is so important to be able to connect to urban places and places where sizable numbers of people live.
Correct. Absolutely. And it's the connection, and it's equity, and it's inclusion. And if you were to go to New Britain, you know, Mike Moriarty, Mark Hoffman down there would say, you know, 20% of our population rely on bicycle to get to work. You know, that's not true in more of the affluent towns, but that is true. And in terms of spending public dollars, in terms of spending taxpayers' dollars, in terms of what to do with public money and the right thing to do with money, in terms of building things. And, you know, Caitlin, come to us and tell people what active transportation is, what vulnerable user is, why it's so important that the public works departments and departments of transportation make our cities and our towns more user-friendly for active transportation, and explain to people what that is.
All right. I'm going to try to remember all those pieces. So active transportation is, you know, anything where you are, using your body, moving your body, not using the vehicle, in every way, pretty much all of us are active transportation, in that realm.
Walking. Yeah.
Right? Some of us are only doing that when we walk from our door to our car and we get into our car and we drive to wherever it is we're going. But, if you're taking public transit, you undoubtedly have, a piece where you are a pedestrian. So it is really focused on pedestrians and bicyclists. But it can be, it can be skateboarders, it can be rollerbladers. And it's just the idea that, by being active, we can live healthier lifestyles, we can be healthier, live longer, reduce our instances of, heart disease and obesity. So it's got all these good benefits, not to mention there's, the environmental impacts as well, by reducing our reliance on, automobiles, we're, reducing our carbon footprint. So there's a lot of connected pieces to it. But the idea of, folks that are choosing to take active transportation are vulnerable users, really is, focused on the idea that for so long, since the advent of the vehicle, we've designed roads and places that really prioritizes the vehicle. And in that process, we placed less priority on our bicyclists, on our pedestrians. And through that process, they have really become incredibly vulnerable to the speeds, to the roadway designs, to the vehicles themselves. So by placing more emphasis on them and being more thoughtful from the beginning of the process, not as an afterthought, from the beginning of the process, we can, create spaces that are better for them and safer for them.
So as a car dealer, some people have said to me, aren't you afraid, by promoting biking, walking? I'm like, no, we have this thing here in Connecticut. It's called December, January, February, March. Now, and days like today, it's raining out. I'm not afraid of that. But as a transportation person, I grew up with a train going right through Simsbury. I'm a pilot. I'm a boater. I'm, a horseback rider. So I love I rode my bicycle across country, 1977. As I say, the most amazing thing, I'm still alive.
You got off.
All of them.
Well, in 1987, 10 years after I rode across country, statistics caught up with me and I went backwards through the windshield of a car. So I know the dangers, trust me. But we need to create safe. Why do people not bike? Or why do they not walk? And in Department of Transportation, and it's not just pointing fingers at Connecticut, but all around the country, as you just said, when cars came, all other forms of transportation went out the window. How do we get cars and buses and trucks to go faster on our highway system? Because we don't care about bicyclists, pedestrians. Which leads to the last point I want to make is, in your opinion, why is it so difficult to engage our public officials and our DOTs? Why is it so difficult to get them to want to create a safer space? It just seems a very arduous process, and they just seem reluctant to engage, to make our municipalities more bike friendly and more bike ped friendly. What do you see going on?
So I can start, and then if you want to add to it. So I'll start by saying that DOT is making really impressive strides in that space. They've got, funding now available for bike ped and active transportation. And, even within the department, they're working on doing things like demonstration projects. They've recently, working with Smart Growth America, were exploring ways in which they as an agency could do things like demonstration projects to increase safety for bicyclists and pedestrians at a faster, pace than what the normal DOT process might be, particularly on state roadways. And some of our communities, particularly in Krog, but not just within the Krog region, you have state roadways that are like your main street, right? Yep. So it's really important for communities to place maybe less emphasis on the vehicle and a little bit more on all users and creating a sense of place in some of these areas.
In some towns or cities, Has the state of Connecticut adopted complete streets? And can you talk a little bit about what complete streets is? Go ahead.
Sure. So yes, the Connecticut DOT has adopted, the idea of complete streets, and basically, in a nutshell, the idea is that complete streets are complete for everyone. It's not saying cars don't exist, but there's a space for vehicles. There's hopefully a space for transit. There's a space for pedestrians and bicyclists. There's even a place maybe, in some areas for people to enjoy that place and congregate and recreate maybe in that space. So just a more complete picture of a street. And yeah, they are, on board with the complete street mentality and vision. I think, I don't know. I think maybe part of it is, for a long time, DOT and the engineering discipline, which I'm not an engineer, so maybe it's easier for me to say this. I don't know. But I think, that discipline was very much, again, driven by, their manuals and their guidebooks, and
Right.
vehicle needs to get from point A to point B. The vehicle, they need to be doing it safely. They need to be doing it efficiently. And I think it takes a lot of effort to change that mindset, change the guidelines and the manuals,
Right.
even. So it's definitely a process. And I think while the agency itself is working on that, I think people as well. I mean, I am not the most avid bicyclist. I would love to use it more. I'd love to use it to get to work, but I'm, currently in a place where it is not easy. I don't feel safe,
Yep.
Taking it on most roadways and getting to work, or being able to drop my kids off easily at daycare. So there's a lot of pieces to it
Right.
that need to fall into place first.
Right. No, go ahead. So,
If I could just add on a little bit. So I would echo Caitlin's comments, certainly. And I think our state really has emerged as something of a leader over the last decade or more.
okay.
Our state, we have a Vision Zero Council, that's led by the commissioner of our DOT. What's Vision Zero? That's an effort to eliminate serious accidents for all road users. So it's an emphasis on making roads safer for everyone.
Right.
The pedestrian, the cyclist, the person in the vehicle.
Yep.
So our state is very supportive there.
Okay.
And the federal government, we're pleased to see the funding coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We just received a $1 million grant to update our regional transportation safety plan, which our member towns will be able to utilize when they're applying for implementation projects. That's the importance of the plan.
Yep.
The plan enables you to apply for design and construction dollars. I think at the local level, many of the challenges are around right-of-way, where you don't have right-of-way,
Right.
and how are you going to acquire that? And then secondly, funding. Our towns are primarily dependent on property taxes.
Yeah.
And it's always a balancing act when you're looking at the operating budget and a town's capital improvement program or their capital fund. But again, I think our state and our region, we're certainly leaders, and particularly with respect to pedestrian safety, we've made tremendous strides and recognize there's a lot of work ahead of us, and we're excited to take on that challenge.
And I'll add too that the DOT has very much prioritized the East Coast Greenway creation and completion of. So we're very excited about this project. I think in particular from the get-go, knowing that we've had these conversations about the East Coast Greenway for
Yep.
quite some time, I think we all envision this as sort of being the last planning effort that needs to happen, and to seamlessly transition to design and construction is the ultimate goal.
And lastly, what we're going to talk about today is when I became a board member for Bike Walk Connecticut, what has kind of organically growing more and more importance. And when I met with Senator Blumenthal, I said, we're number 20. I showed him on my phone. We're number 20 in the country for bike-friendly states. We're next to number 1, Massachusetts. So it really is a mission of mine, of Bike Walk Connecticut. We've really adopted the whole, we've got to get more bike-friendly communities. And that's not just a greenway. That's a whole mindset of a community to become bicycle friendly. And actually Manchester hosted us at a meeting for Park and Rec in Manchester. That city's going to be beautiful in the next 5 years, and they're not going for bronze. They're like, how do we get to silver? It's like, okay. And actually, Boston did that. They skipped bronze. They went right to silver. And I think Newington. I was in conversation with them on the Steve Parker show in Newington. And we're trying to engage some of these towns particularly along the East Coast Greenway. Hey, the first paragraph in your application, we're located on the East Coast Greenway. Come on, you got to be a bike-friendly community. So, but thank you again for watching. Any comments? We will put our email address for Simsbury Community Media. There we go. I got it right finally. And thank you again for watching. We'll have some more shows and more updates on exactly what you guys are doing. And I'm excited because, as you know, active transportation greenways is just got to be more emphasized more and more for, as you said, you got to feel safe in order to do it. But thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.